how should someone think about building a framework of how they can take the tactics that we talk about today and actually use them? As we mentioned at the very start, compliance, adherence. You can have the best strategy in the world. If you don't end up applying it, it means nothing. What is your best advice on how people can form a framework of tools that they can actually use?
Well, I think you have to start with the objective. So everything I talk about, I've always talked about this way, or at least for more than a decade, and I certainly have written the book through this lens, which is you go from objective to strategy to tactics. So we always want to start with the objective, and I do think it's worth being clear for any individual what their objective is. And I take a lot of time with patients going through this. So, when you go to your doctor, that's not a common question. What is your objective? And again, it's not the fault of the doctor. I think it's the fault of the system. The system isn't really set up to ask that question. The system is more set up to kind of play a bit of whack-a-mole. Is there a problem right now? Is there a symptom right now that I need to address? But if you're trying to play this sort of long game, you have to work backwards and say, okay, what do you want to be true at the end of your life? And the framework that I use for that is called the marginal decade. So the marginal decade is the last decade of your life. Everyone will have a marginal decade. And that's not a pleasant thought for many of us to think about, right? I don't love thinking about the fact that I'm going to have a marginal decade, but I will. Now, you never know the day you enter your marginal decade. But many people know when they are in it. And the question then becomes, what do you want to be true in that decade? So let's play the game with you. How old are you, Chris?
35.
Okay. So let's assume that, fate will smile on you and, God forbid, you're not going to have some premature death. You're not going to die in a car accident next week or be stricken with cancer in, 10 years or something like that. So let's just assume your marginal decade is kind of the 9th to 10th decade of your life. What do you want to be true in that decade?
I would like to still be able to move without assistance.
What kind of moving?
I would love to be able to still walk.
Okay.
I would love to I adore dogs. So being able to take the dog for a walk, being able to throw the ball.
How big a dog?
Golden Retriever.
Okay.
Is that a big dog?
Yeah.
Big for a 90-year-old?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you can be ambitious here.
I am ambitious.
Yeah.
Big Golden Retriever.
Okay.
I would.
So you want to be able to walk a Golden Retriever?
Yep.
How far?
30 minutes on a
30
morning.
minutes a day? Okay.
Yep. Maybe twice a day if I could, at best.
Hills or no hills?
Not so fussed about hills.
Okay.
Hills can go. But do want to live in a house that's got a balcony.
Okay.
So would need to be able to go up and down stairs.
Okay.
Would love to still be able to pick up grandchildren. I have no idea whether that's realistic at 90 years old, but that would be something I'd love to do.
Pick them up from the floor, from a crib?
Both.
Where? Okay.
Would love to have still a good quality of sleep. And would love to be able to
have sex
at 90.
Yep.
Not something I've considered. Good question. Let's say yes. I'm still going at 90.
Okay.
And probably most importantly above all of this is still have proper cognitive function. Like still, I value the quality of my thoughts more than anything on the planet. I still want to be able to learn. I still want to be able to satisfy my curiosity. If I was still able to have conversations like this at 90, that would be just fantastic to me.
I assume you don't want to be in pain?
That would be good.
Okay. So again, we could drill into this a lot further, but I think what would emerge, and by the way, this is a valuable exercise because I don't think a lot of people do this. But I think everybody needs to do this and needs to go really far down the rabbit hole. And what you'll realize is, by the way, everything you've said is totally reasonable. Like I have some people, when you play this game with them, the first thing they say is, I want to be heli skiing when I'm 90. And it's like, I'm not going to tell you that's not possible, but like that's the first thing you would say is a little odd, right? But everything you're saying is achievable, but is challenging. So for example, walking a Golden Retriever, at the age of 35, you don't even have to think about it. But if you actually look at the force that's in that leash and the amount of balance and strength and lower leg variability you need to not fall over when that's happening, by the time you're in your 70s, that's going to be very difficult. So you have to build up an enormous reserve in those capacities today to cope with and anticipate the inevitable decline that's going to come in all of those. So that's how you start. You start with the objective. You reverse engineer what the implication of each objective is, and we understand pretty well what the decline of those properties looks like.
I need to stop you there. How realistic is it for some male in his 90s to still be able to have sex without any assistance?
Well, it depends how you define assistance. I think the use of like phosphodiesterase inhibitors is probably going to be required.
What's that?
Like a drug like Viagra or Cialis.
Understood.
But otherwise, I think it is realistic. But again, like think about what that comes down to. So a big part of that is going to come down to your microvascular system. So there's a reason that, having type 2 diabetes, having atherosclerosis is an enormous cause of impotence. It's not affecting your brain. What it's affecting is the microvasculature, the blood flow of the penis. So there's an argument for being very metabolically healthy. I mean, I see this even in patients who are in their 50s and 60s who at one point are completely dependent on drugs like Cialis, and then you get them metabolically healthy, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, I don't need this anymore.
I wonder how many men who aren't that concerned about getting overweight, who aren't that concerned about losing a foot, but if you told them that their penis would stop working, that would be the final motivation for them to look after their diet.
Whatever it takes.
Okay, so we've got objective.
Yep. Then we have to think about what the strategy is, right? And this is where I think it's very complicated in this problem.
Is this where people get lost?
I think so. I think this is the step that most people just skip altogether and go right to the tactics. So they say, okay, I hear you on objectives. Now tell me how to eat, how to exercise, how to sleep, et cetera. And I think you can't skip this bucket. And there's a reason that those like chapters in the book that are devoted to this. If you're playing... if you're asking questions that are straightforward, you don't really need a strategy. So if you said to me, Peter, my objective right now is not to get a sunburn, we don't need a major strategy. Like it's relatively straight. We can go straight to tactics. You're going to avoid the sun altogether. If you need to be in the sun, you're going to wear long sleeves and a hat, and you're going to wear sunscreen and blah, 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 blah. And it's pretty straightforward. But when you say, my objective is to live 10 years longer than I otherwise would and do so at a much higher function as evidenced by that list of things you just said, well, I can't just jump to tactics. They're not obvious. So instead, I have to go through a whole bunch of indirect measures because I don't have what I really want, right? What I really want is I'd love to be able to rely on the gold standard, which is randomized controlled experiments that would give me the answer. But for reasons that are self-evident and obvious and not worth explaining, we don't have randomized controlled experiments that answer all the questions that pertain to taking a 35-year-old and setting him up to be the best 95-year-old. So we have to have an option B. And option B really rests on a whole bunch of other pillars of strategic insight. So one of those things is, what are the inferences we can make from observational data of long-lived, well-functioned humans? So looking at the centenarians, for example, who we very quickly figure out are genetically gifted. So their superpower was picking the right parents. But we can still learn a lot from them. We'll put that aside for a moment. The other thing we can look at is short-term human studies that don't cover the hard outcome, such as the full duration of your life, but cover certain things. So, for example, there might be hard outcome studies that look at heart disease or stroke, or hard outcomes that look at performance and functional metrics such as strength, resilience, and things like that. We then look at animal literature, or non-human literature, I think to be more accurate, that looks at the full duration outcome. So I think we can look at some of those animal studies and get a pretty good sense of what's affecting lifespan and health span. But we have to be careful with it, like we do with everything, in that we want to be very thoughtful that we're not just sort of zeroing in on one model. So this is, again, where we look at things that favor lots of models. So, something that's consistent across mice and worms and flies and dogs is much more interesting than something that is only going to work in one mouse model in one person's lab. Then we want to look at mechanistic studies. So how can we understand, for example, the benefits of exercise when we look at the cellular level, when we understand when we look at proteomic, metabolomic changes of exercise, and what do those things tell us, as an example, about, say, exercise or sleep restriction or dietary restriction. And then the final tool that I think we look at in our strategy bucket is Mendelian randomization. So sometimes you actually let nature do the randomized controlled experiment for you. So Mendelian randomizations are very elegant types of studies where when you can find genes that are responsible for phenotypes of interest, you can ask the question, as nature shuffles those genes, do we establish causality by the outcome? So when you put all 5 of those together, that's how you start to cobble together what your tactics are. And that's the final piece of it. So what are your tactics? You basically have 5 domains. You have all things that pertain to what you eat, all things that pertain to how you exercise and move, how you sleep, all the drugs, molecules, supplements, hormones that you could possibly take, and then all the, call it the bucket of things that you would do to manage emotional and mental health.
When you break it down like that, longevity seems very simple, that you have these 5 key areas that you're focused on. Where are people focusing their attention, in your opinion, when it comes to both health span and lifespan longevity, that have the shortest levers, but people are giving undue attention to?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think what I find funny is that everybody, and I'm not sure. I know I've been guilty of this myself. It's very tempting to just focus on your favorite thing. Like there was a point in time where virtually all of my attention was focused on nutrition. Like I really felt that nutrition was the alpha and the omega of this entire equation. And all you had to do was sort of eat a certain way and everything was going to work itself out. Obviously, the medical establishment is hyper-focused on the medicine side of this, as evidenced by the fact that's the only thing we learned in medical school and residency, right? It's not like anybody taught you how to administer exercise or nutrition. Even if you knew that those things mattered, you had no education in how to actually do anything about it. It would sort of be like an oncologist who knows chemotherapy is good, but doesn't know anything else, like doesn't know which chemotherapy or what dose or what schedule or what biomarkers to use to track the progress of the chemotherapy in the, in the tumor as it regresses. So each entity, I think, just kind of has their own expertise.
Every single morning for over 3 years now, I've started my day the exact same way, which is with Element in water. Element contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio of sodium, potassium, and magnesium, and it is the best hydration drink that I've ever found. It tastes fantastic. It's super refreshing. Orange is just the most OP flavor in the world. It's absolutely phenomenal, and it helps to play a critical role in reducing muscle cramps and fatigue. It regulates your appetite, it optimizes brain health, and it helps curb cravings. They're also the exclusive hydration partner to Team USA weightlifting and relied on by tons of Olympic athletes and everyday high performers all around the world. Also, there is a no BS, no questions asked refund policy where you can buy a box completely risk-free, and if you do not like it for any reason, they will give you a refund during an unlimited duration, and you don't even need to return the box. That's how confident they are that you'll love it. Element are giving away a free sample pack of all 8 flavors with your first box if you go to the link in the description box below or drinklmnt.com/MW. That's drinklmnt.com/MW. What's happening, people? If you enjoyed that, then press here for the full unedited episode. And don't forget to subscribe.